What if I told you that every hour you spent bored in a classroom wasn't a failure of the system? What if it was the entire point? What if I told you that the school system as you know it was never designed to educate you? What if its true, original purpose was never to set you free, but to do the exact opposite, to control you? That feeling you have, that you graduated after 12 years of bells and textbooks, yet you knew almost nothing about how the world actually works? That wasn't a bug. That was the feature. The anxiety over tests, the crushing of your creativity, the mind-numbing boredom. All of it was by design. This might sound like a wild conspiracy theory, but the history is crystal clear. The men who built this system wrote down their intentions. The mandatory public education that dominates the West wasn't born from a desire to enlighten the masses. It was born from a desire to mold them. And today, you're going to understand why the modern school is the most effective tool for social control ever invented. And more importantly, how you can finally break the mental programming it installed in you. To understand what went wrong, we have to go back. Not to ancient Greece, though Sparta was a chilling example of children being state property, trained for military obedience. The true root of our system is much more recent and far more calculated. It begins in the 16th century with Martin Luther. When Luther wrote to German leaders in 1524, he didn't just ask for schools so people could read the Bible. He demanded mandatory schooling so the state could enforce Lutheran values and guarantee uniformity. He understood the power of capturing the young mind. But the true architect of the system that now rules the world was the Kingdom of Prussia in the early 18th century. Prussia, a small, resource-poor state, needed an edge. King Frederick William I in 1717 didn't establish the first national compulsory school system out of a love for learning. He did it to strengthen his army. He needed soldiers who would obey orders without question, and citizens who would pay their taxes without complaint. The Prussian system was a terrifying success. It was built on 3 pillars. First, segmentation. Children were divided by age, not by ability, moving in lockstep. Second, standardization. Everyone learned the same content, in the same way, at the same pace, dictated by a central curriculum. Third, obedience. The highest virtue in a student was not curiosity or creativity. It was submission to the authority of the teacher, who was an agent of the state. This model, which became known as the factory model, was brilliant at its intended purpose. It produced exactly what Prussia needed: obedient soldiers for its armies and docile workers for its new factories. The school was, quite literally, an assembly line for human beings. The bell that rang to change classes wasn't to mark the progress of knowledge. It was to train the child to react to an external stimulus, just like the factory whistle they would one day obey. And then the rest of the world decided to copy it. In the mid-19th century, American educational reformers like Horace Mann and Calvin Stowe looked at their growing, chaotic, individualistic nation filled with immigrants, and they were terrified. They didn't see liberty, they saw disorder. They needed a tool to Americanize the masses, to create a unified, predictable, and manageable population. So where did they go for inspiration? Prussia. They traveled, observed the Prussian system in action, and returned as evangelists. They aggressively promoted the adoption of this model. In 1852, Massachusetts became the first state to implement it, and by 1900, the Prussian military model was the law of the land across America. Europe followed suit. The entire Western world adopted an 18th century Prussian military system designed to create soldiers, and we called it public education. But don't just take my interpretation. Let's listen to the architects themselves. Woodrow Wilson, a university president at Stanford before he was president of the United States, wrote this in 1916. Our schools are factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned. Raw products, shaped. But no one was more explicit than Frederick Taylor Gates. Gates wasn't just some educator. He was the business advisor to John D. Rockefeller. He was the founder of the General Education Board in 1903, the Rockefeller institution that used its immense fortune to shape the American school system. In his book, The Country School of Tomorrow, Gates wrote this, and I need you to pay very close attention. In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people, or any of their children, into philosophers or men of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or artists. We shall not hunt for lawyers, doctors, statesmen. So what did they want? Gates continues. The purpose was simple: to prepare people to lead a limited life within the boundaries in which they were born. Let that sink in. The stated goal of the men who funded and designed our education system was not to create thinkers, artists, or leaders. The goal was to keep you within the boundaries in which you were born. It was to create a permanent, compliant, manageable working class. The philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce explained exactly how this is done in his essay, The Fixation of Belief. He called it the method of authority. How do you implant a collective belief? You establish an institution, like the state. You tirelessly repeat the correct ideas. You teach these ideas to the young before they are old enough to question them. And, most critically, you censor or ridicule any opposing view. The populace is kept in deliberate ignorance. Their passions are manipulated. Any dissenting idea is met with fear or rejection. The school became this institution, a brilliant system for producing obedient citizens with uniform beliefs. Is it any surprise, then, that according to the book Cradle of Eminence, which studied 400 of the 20th century's most outstanding figures, 3 out of every 5 had serious conflicts with school? Creative, curious, defiant minds do not fit in a system designed to suppress originality. The system wasn't made for them. It was made for everyone else. The result of this social engineering is what the late, great John Taylor Gatto called the hidden curriculum. Gatto was named New York City and New York State Teacher of the Year before he quit his job, declaring that he was no longer willing to hurt children. He argued that school doesn't just teach reading and math. In fact, that's the least important part. The real lessons are taught through the structure of the school itself, and these lessons are devastating. The first hidden lesson is confusion. You are taught a flood of disconnected information. Biology has nothing to do with math, which has nothing to do with history. Nothing connects. The goal, Gatto argued, is to prevent you from forming a coherent picture of the world. You become dependent on experts to tell you what to think, because you were never trained to connect the dots yourself. The second lesson is class position. From day one, you learn to know your place. You are constantly graded, tested, and ranked. You're put in the good reading group or the slow one. You are given a number or a letter that defines your worth. You learn that life is a constant competition and that you must accept the slot you've been assigned. The third lesson is indifference. The bell rings. You're in the middle of a fascinating thought, an engaging conversation, or a project you actually care about. It doesn't matter. The bell rang. You must stop what you're doing and move to the next, unrelated task. You learn not to get too invested in anything, not to care too deeply. The fourth lesson is emotional dependency. You become addicted to approval. You raise your hand for permission to speak or to use the restroom. You turn in your work not when you think it's good, but when the authority figure tells you to. You learn to measure your self-worth not by your own standards, but by the smile, the check mark, or the praise of the person in charge. The fifth lesson is intellectual dependency. The teacher has the answers. The textbook has the facts. Your job is not to discover, but to memorize. Real critical thinking is dangerous. What happens if you disagree with the book? You get a bad grade. You learn that knowledge comes from outside, from authority, and not from your own internal investigation. You wait to be told what to think. The sixth lesson is provisional self-esteem. Your value as a person is measured by external reports. Your grades define you. You aren't good because you are curious, kind, or brave. You are good because you got an A, or bad because you got a D. Your sense of self becomes fragile, entirely dependent on outside validation. And the seventh and most sinister lesson is surveillance. You learn that you are always being watched. By the teacher, the principal, your peers. There is no privacy. You learn to behave as if you are constantly being judged, because you are. This creates a population that self-polices, afraid to step out of line even when no one is looking. When you add up these 7 lessons, what do you get? You get the perfect citizen for Frederick Taylor Gatto's world. A person who is confused, knows their place, is indifferent, emotionally needy, intellectually passive, has low self-esteem, and lives in fear of being judged. That is the hidden curriculum, and it is far more important than the quadratic formula. But the critique doesn't stop at social structure. It goes much, much deeper, to the very nature of how we learn. And here, we must talk about one of education's greatest critics, the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer, with his brutal clarity, identified the core philosophical flaw in the entire system. He said that human beings, in their natural state, learn in the only way that makes sense. First comes the experience, then comes the idea. A child touches a flame. She gets burned. She experiences the heat and the pain. From this direct experience, she forms the idea that fire is dangerous. The idea is rooted in reality. There is an unbreakable bond between what she thinks and what she has seen. This is how we truly understand the world. The traditional school system, which Schopenhauer called artificial education, completely inverts this process. In school, first come the ideas, then, maybe, comes the experience. Usually, it never comes at all. The student's mind is filled with concepts, theories, and definitions that he has read or been told before he has any direct contact with the reality of those things. The result? The child learns the word democracy before having any real experience of self-governance. She learns the laws of physics from a chalkboard before ever building anything with her hands. She memorizes social justice or free markets before she's ever had a job or paid a tax. To Schopenhauer, this is an intellectual catastrophe. The young mind becomes saturated with theories that it then tries to apply to the real world, but it almost always does so incorrectly, because the ideas are not rooted in lived experience. He called this empty word talk, and this is where we get what we now call cognitive dissonance. When reality finally knocks on the door and conflicts with the ideas the school implanted, what happens? Instead of adapting the idea to fit reality, the person trained in this system does the opposite. They reject reality to protect the idea. We see this every single day. People holding economic theories that demonstrably lead to poverty, but they refuse to see it. People with political visions that create the exact opposite of what they claim to want. They cannot see the world as it is. They can only see it through the distorted lens they were given. As Schopenhauer said, this kind of schooling can permanently distort the mind. This is why, he claimed, we so often find more sound judgment and better common sense in an illiterate person than in many educated ones. The illiterate person was forced to learn from the only book that matters, the book of the world, of direct experience. The educated person learned only from other books. So what was Schopenhauer's radical solution? It was shocking. He proposed that children should be kept away from any teaching that could lead to error until they are 16. That's right. He argued that because the faculty of judgment is the last to mature, we should teach absolutely nothing that involves opinion, no philosophy, no religion, no general worldviews, to a young mind. Errors acquired in childhood, he said, tend to become static and remain for life. Instead, until age 16, children should focus only on subjects where error is objective and obvious. Subjects like mathematics, where 2 plus 2 is 4 and any other answer is factually wrong. Languages where grammar and vocabulary are clear. History, but only the memorization of dates and facts with no interpretation. Why? Because memory is strongest in youth. Those years should be used to absorb useful, quality information, like filling a hard drive. Only after 16, when the faculty of judgment finally begins to blossom, should the young person be exposed to the great questions of life, to philosophy, to politics, to ethics. And the most important part, instead of rushing children with books, we should gradually expose them to real things. Teach them to get their ideas directly from the world, not from fables or what others have told them. They should spend more time in nature and experiencing life than locked in a classroom. Our current system does the exact opposite. It throws the most complex, ideologically charged ideas at 7-year-olds, ensuring that they form prejudices long before they form judgment. If Schopenhauer's critique was about the method, Friedrich Nietzsche's was about the people and the purpose. Nietzsche, that most provocative of thinkers, also dedicated parts of his book Twilight of the Idols to the problem of modern education. He was merciless. For him, the system was a farce for three main reasons: the lack of real teachers, the democratization of education, and the ridiculous speed of the whole process. First, Nietzsche looked at the schools and asked, where are the educators? He didn't see educators. He saw what he called disguised nannies, or civil servants. He saw mass-produced bureaucrats with degrees. For Nietzsche, a true educator is not someone who teaches you a subject. A true educator is a noble, superior intellect, a person who is the living embodiment of culture, someone you look at and want to become. True educators for Nietzsche are exceptional spirits, and by definition, they are incredibly rare. And when you lack true educators, he said, all of culture goes into decline. We stop striving for greatness and start striving for a diploma. And this brings us to his second, most controversial point: the democratization of education. Nietzsche wrote that the terms higher education and the masses are a contradiction in terms. He was an elitist, make no mistake. But his logic was this: higher education, true culture, is a difficult path that requires a rare kind of discipline and talent. It should only be for the exceptions, the few who are prepared for that privilege. What happens when you try to give higher education to everyone? You don't elevate the masses, you degrade the education. The obsession with educating everyone equally, in Nietzsche's view, leads to a leveling down, to an enforced mediocrity. What should be a slow, artisanal process of cultivating a great mind becomes a mass production system. A factory, just as the Prussians wanted. And that factory leads to his third point: the speed. The system is in an absurd hurry. From childhood, you are pushed along an assembly line: elementary, middle, high school, college, and then you must get the job you will have for the rest of your life. All of this decided before you're 23. To Nietzsche, this was madness, a bad joke. He said that the truly cultivated person needs time. They are not formed in a few years. A 30-year-old man, he wrote, is just an apprentice in matters of high culture. The system doesn't want a cultivated human being. The state doesn't want a deep individual who thinks for themselves and takes a lifetime to mature. The state wants a function. It needs you to get off the assembly line as fast as possible so you can start paying taxes and playing your role in the economic machine. The result is not a complete human. The result is the specialist. The person who knows everything about one tiny thing and is a complete ignorant on everything else. The system doesn't produce great men. It produces, as he put it, big ears and big noses. Fragmented specialists who have lost all sense of the whole. At this point, Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, despite their differences, arrive at the same conclusion. You cannot wait for the system to educate you. You must do it yourself. Our public schools, Nietzsche wrote, are saturated with mass-produced teachers, and the whole system has become a genuine scandal. So we arrive at the climax of this journey. What does this all mean for you right now? It means the system is not broken. It is working perfectly. It was designed by Prussians to create obedient soldiers. It was funded by Rockefellers to create docile workers and predictable consumers, kept within their boundaries. It was structured by Gatto to teach you confusion, dependency, and fear. It was analyzed by Schopenhauer as a machine that inverts natural learning and distorts your perception of reality. And it was despised by Nietzsche as a hurried factory that produces mediocre specialists instead of noble spirits. That feeling you have that you're not living up to your potential, that fear of being wrong, that need for external validation, that difficulty thinking outside the box, that is not a personal failure. That is the programming. It is the ghost of the classroom haunting your adult life. The system was designed to crush the very traits that produce genius: originality, critical thinking, authenticity, and above all, disobedience. The system doesn't want unique individuals. It wants interchangeable parts. The good news is that once you see the matrix, once you understand the architecture of your prison, you can begin to escape. The final lesson that all these thinkers leave us with is this: schooling is not education. John Taylor Gatto drew the final distinction. He wrote, Whatever an education is, it should make you a unique individual, not a conformist. It should give you an original spirit with which to face the great challenges. It should allow you to find values that are your compass in life. It should make you spiritually rich, a person who loves what they do. And it should teach you what is truly important, how to live and how to die. That is the kind of education that no factory, no modern school, no standardized system can ever offer. So, how do you begin this process of deprogramming and real education? The first step is to take responsibility. You must become an autodidact. The information age has given us tools that Schopenhauer and Nietzsche could have only dreamed of. You have access to every library on earth in your pocket. Stop waiting for someone to give you a curriculum. Create your own. The second step is to follow Schopenhauer's advice. Prioritize experience. Stop just consuming ideas. Stop jumping from one video to the next, one book to the next. Pick one thing and do it. Want to learn to write? Write 1,000 pages. Want to understand business? Start one, even if it's tiny. Let your ideas be born from the raw, painful, beautiful contact with reality. The third step is to follow Nietzsche's advice. Find true masters. Stop listening to the nannies of the modern day, the social media gurus repeating platitudes. Go to the source. Read the original texts. Engage with the most brilliant minds in history. Let Plato, let Da Vinci, let Nietzsche be your teachers. They are demanding, but they are the only ones worth your time. And the fourth and final step is to redefine the goal. Your goal is not a degree, not a job title, not the approval of others. Your goal is the one Gatto defined, to become a unique individual. To find out what you love to do, what your values are, and to build a life around that, not around what the school factory told you to be. The truth is, if you want to be truly educated, at some point you will have to disobey. You will have to actively unlearn the hidden lessons of conformity and dependency. This conversation we've just had is only the first step. It's the awakening. But the real work starts now. And I want to know from you. What was the one hidden lesson from school that you felt most in your own life? Was it the fear of failure that stops you from taking risks today? Was it the need for a teacher's approval? Was it the indifference that made it hard to find your passion? Tell me your story in the comments, because your story is part of this collective liberation. And if you are finally ready to stop being raw material and to start carving yourself into an original individual, if you want to continue receiving deep analyses like this to expand your mind, hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to ensure you don't miss our next meeting, where we will dive even deeper into how to break this programming and build a truly free mind.